Hi folks, this is Klaus at Top Hydraulics. We'll talk today about the electrical system for the convertible top on an R171 SLK. That's model years 2005 through 2011 in the US. We'll talk mostly about microswitches because that's what do-it-yourselfers have influence over, and a little bit about the computer and the Windows. So let me show you what all there is. You see some tags on the car here. We have the pump, of course, in the middle between the seats, and we have the top control module behind the driver's seat in the US at least. If you're in Australia, it's a different story. We have the top control switch, which you're well familiar with, behind the gear selector. And important is that the computer is also talking to the door control module, which there's one in the front of the left door and one in the front of the right door, and the window regulators, which the window regulators of course lower and raise the windows. Those regulators have hall sensors in them which count how many times those window motors have turned, and the computer knows through those hall sensors where the windows are at. The top will not move if the computer does not know where the windows are at. So we'll talk about that in a little more detail later. But we'll concentrate on microswitches, because the microswitches tell the computer where the top is while it's operating. And most likely you're watching this video because you get a display in your instrument cluster that says top in operation, and you're wondering, why is my top not moving? If there's two more possible displays in the instrument cluster that are pretty much self-explanatory. One is trunk is unlocked or trunk is open. That's a simple one. That means that the trunk latch in the rear isn't giving the signal to the computer that the trunk is closed. Most likely your trunk is plain unlocked and you have to close it. Or there's a problem with that switch, which is not very common. The other possible display in your instrument cluster is what does it say? Partition open or close partition, which means the trunk partition that you have to close before the top can move, before the computer knows it's safe to move the top, hasn't been closed properly, or there's a problem with a switch in there. Of course, we'll show you that switch and what to do about it. Then there are two or three more switches that could fail, but that are not very likely to fail. We'll cover them anyway. The most important one is the trunk or cover open switch that is attached to the right trunk lid cylinder that flips the trunk lid back. It has a sliding switch assembly, and that sliding plastic switch assembly is slightly prone to failure. It is the most likely switch to fail in this top. We also have the trunk closed switch that's inside the tubular frame for the trunk lock, for the trunk frame. It is not a likely one to fail, but we'll show it to you anyway. Now, one that doesn't fail much but that can give you error signals is the front linkage assembly. That is the front lock assembly that locks the top to the windshield. And when that doesn't get locked all the way, you will get a message, top in operation, simply because the computer assumes the top isn't locked all the way in the front, and that'll give you a big alarm while you're driving because it's not safe with the top unlocked. And that switch itself is fairly reliable, but if somebody has worked on your top and not properly lined the front lock, that switch could be out of alignment, or you could have some wiring issues or the likes. Normally, this will only give you an error message either if somebody has recently worked on this front lock assembly, or if your pump is out of fluid and cannot lock the top completely. So at that point, you'll have to check the fluid level in the pump, and that's shown in another video with what we are really about at Top Hydraulics, working on the hydraulic components of the system. So After this, we'll show you the location of all these switches, and then I'll make a few more comments about the Windows and the control module. The trunk partition switch, part number 171-820-6310. This is the important one. It's the one that signals when the trunk partition has closed, and as you can hopefully hear, it clicks when it's depressed, meaning when the trunk partition is closed. That creates a closed circuit to the computer, and well, obviously this switch needs to be closed for the top to operate. If you don't hear it clicking, then it's broken and you have to replace it. If you have your trunk apart because you're working on the top, then you can bypass this switch in order to make the top operate. Let me show you how that's done. We've cheated a little bit, have taken the tabs out already that fasten this panel in the trunk. So let me just pull the panel out and I'll show you this switch in position. But just bear with me a second. Here we go. Just a little massaging and we have this panel out. Now you see the switch in here. It's easy to take out. You just move some tabs and the switch will lift out. Now the switch has a connector on it that obviously is not connected right now because I had such an easy time pulling this panel out. That connector actually is normally in here, and you do have to disconnect it when you take the panel out. There is a simple tab on the connector that you push in order to release it from the switch assembly. Now, what you also see here is a copper wire. Any metal wire, of course, will work. You can use a paper clip stuck into these two pins in the connector to bypass the switch, make the computer believe that the trunk partition is closed. The trunk or cover open switch is attached to the right trunk lid tubular frame cylinder, and you access it by taking this side panel out. Now let me show you the switch the way it is attached to a cylinder already. It's easier to film it this way. Switch part number 171-820-7610. Now this switch is attached to the cylinder, but as the cylinder extends, there's a rider that goes up and down, and it will eventually trigger this switch inside. When the cylinder is fully extended, meaning the trunk lid has flipped back all the way, then this switch will create a closed circuit, and the connector is down here. It's kind of hard to measure on these pins, so you have to use a little bit of ingenuity to check whether this switch actually works. In general, if it clicks, then it works. You might be able to hear it click. You may have to take the switch assembly off the cylinder first to check it out. Here we go, and if we can zoom in a little bit, then you'll see the microswitch inside here getting triggered by this plastic rider, and here you can hear it clicking. Normally this kind of switch, if it clicks, it works. There are exceptions, but in general with microswitches, if they click, they work. So a very common problem is you start to retract your roof, to open your roof. You pull the button, the trunk lid retracts, and then the pump keeps on running, but you don't know why the top isn't moving. It could be this switch not telling the computer that the trunk lid has flipped back and thus not going on to the next step. Or it could be that the computer does not know where the windows are at. Ironically, the computer will move the trunk lid, but it will not start moving the top before it knows that the windows are in a safe position. And that's what we'll get to later again about the top control module, the door control module, and the window regulators. The trunk closed switch 171-820-6210. It's kind of elegant. It is hiding behind this aluminum cover piece in the frame that gets moved as the trunk lid flips back, and it signals to the computer when the trunk lid has flipped forward again, and that's what we call the trunk closed switch. Now, just to show you, here's the switch assembly. As the trunk lid pulls back, this frame actually pulls up, and pretty much fail-safe switch assembly here that gets triggered when the frame is in it. The trunk lock itself, part number 1717500-185, is the one that does the normal trunk latching. It does have a position sensor in it. If you were to take this out, you would notice 4 wires in there. 2 wires for the electric motor that closes this latch, and 2 wires in the middle that are the position sensor. I believe this one is actually a closed circuit when the trunk lid is open. If you get the message in your instrument cluster that the trunk lid is unlocked, then, well, either you have a bad wire somewhere, or actually your trunk lid is unlocked, or you have a problem with this part itself. I'd like to make another comment about the microswitches in the top. The R171 microswitches are in fact quite reliable, so you can feel good about that. What I'd like to talk about is that there's really only 4 switches that get activated while the top is moving. We have the front linkage assembly, meaning the switch that tells the computer the top is latched in the front. We have the roof retractor sensor. We have the cover open switch, and we have the trunk closed switch. Now, I've said that already before, but what you want to keep in mind is the sequence in which things happen here. The computer always needs to know how far one stage of the opening or closing process has gone before it'll move on to the next stage. So if you open the top, you will first have the trunk lid flipping back at the same time that the front lock unlocks. So when the trunk lid is flipped back and the top is unlocked, then you get the signals from the trunk open switch and the front linkage assembly that we're now ready to move on and pull the top back. The top will not pull back before the signal has come from the cover open switch and from the front linkage assembly that they're both ready. At that point, the top will move back. Once it's down, it triggers the roof retractor sensor. Once that one has been triggered, then what happens next? The trunk lid closes. When the trunk lid closes, then the trunk lid frame pushes a simple switch in the rear that tells the computer the trunk lid is closed, and now we can raise the window and drive away. Conversely, we open the top, we close the top, trunk lid flips back, and then after we get the signal from the trunk open switch that the trunk lid has flipped back all the way and the computer knows that the windows are down, then it will unlock in the front and pull back. Actually, it will unlock at the same time in the front as it pulls the trunk lid back, and then it will retract the top. The roof retractor sensor 171-820-2410 is located between the left main lift cylinder and the left roll bar, more or less, and it gets activated once the panel hatch shelf behind the roll bars comes down all the way. When the roof retracts, you will first see the roof retracting into the trunk. That's where we've stopped right now, and then once the roof is fully retracted, the main lift cylinders contract a little bit more and they pull down this hatch shelf or rear trim panel, whatever you want to call it. I will activate the pump now, pull the button back to open the top some more, and you will see that the linkage here is pushing onto the microswitch on this switch assembly. Now I've pulled the hat shelf up again to demonstrate how this switch works. Hope you can hear it clicking. Normally if it clicks, it works. The roof closed switch, I don't have the part number because I would have to take the trim panels off to look at the part number printed on the switch. But if you ever have a problem with this part, well, then you can just take the trim piece off under the windshield header and look at the part number printed on the switch assembly. The switch assembly gets triggered by the plastic cone in the front of the top lock assembly. I'm going to simulate that going into the windshield header, and once it's triggered, then the computer will activate the front lock cylinder. So let me show you from another angle how this gets triggered. So we'll use a screwdriver this time to imitate the cone, and you can hear the switch clicking. If it clicks, normally it works. There's possibly only two ways that this can cause a malfunction for you. One is if there's a lot of dirt caked in here and the switch stays triggered for some reason. It's not very likely in the R171. There's so much grease packed in here compared to the R170 where it used to be a problem, that this should not be a problem. And the boot on the switch itself could get stiff with time. That used to be a problem. We have not run into that or heard of that problem in the R171, so we can assume that this assembly is quite safe. The biggest problem is actually that the plastic cone in the front of your hardtop has been broken and is not triggering this switch. Then the roof will never latch. So if somebody has mistreated the roof and let it fall too fast towards the windshield without that cone hitting the right spot, then that plastic cone might have broken and is no longer triggering the switch, which means you're trying to close the top and the pump keeps running while you're at the windshield header, but nothing's latching. That's because the switch has not been triggered. The front linkage assembly 171790071 is the whole latch assembly with the front lock cylinder in it. It has a microswitch attached on the right side that gets triggered when the front latches. Let me demonstrate. I'll push the button to latch the top completely. There, the button is triggered, and that obviously tells the computer top is latched. It's safe to go, assuming that the trunk lid is closed. Now this switch is quite reliable, and hopefully you don't have to replace it, because you would have to buy the whole big linkage assembly. In our video on the front lock cylinder replacement, we show you how to balance or align the front latch assembly so that this switch always triggers at the right time. So as I've mentioned before, the top control module, the computer needs to know where the windows are at, because it's not safe to move the top if the windows are up and the top could be crashing into it. That's the real reason. And you know how the windows normally come down about a ½ inch when you open the doors. If they don't come down a ½ inch while you open the doors, then either that is because the top isn't completely closed or completely opened, but in that case you would get a message in the instrument cluster top in operation, or they are not moving because they need to be synchronized. If your battery has been disconnected, then the computer eventually loses memory of where the windows are at, and the windows need to be resynchronized or indexed. The way you do it is push the console buttons to run the windows up, and once the windows are up, push the button keep the button pushed another couple seconds, you'll see the windows wiggling a little bit, and they are synchronized. So when you open the door, they come down a half an inch, and same on the other side. And the windows are synchronized. The computer knows where the windows are at. If you have only one window moving and not the other, then either the problem is in the window regulator itself, meaning the window regulator motor, such as I'm holding in my hand here, or the door control module. That is for you to find out. And well, ultimately it takes getting at those parts and trying to put some voltage on the window regulator, or just swap a window regulator that has failed on you. It's a bit of work to remove the trim pieces from the door and get at this window regulator, but here's one. It ultimately gets its signal from the door control module to move, which again is getting the signal from the top control module to move, as long as the top control module is the one that is used to move the windows here. I hope that makes sense. Good luck.